Okay, let's look at making suggestions and giving advice. First of all, let's look at the difference between suggestions and advice. Here are different ways of making suggestions. A suggestion is something which is often given in a friendly or informal way. It is up to you to follow that suggestion or not. Whereas advice is different. Advice is something that should be followed strictly by people. If people ignore advice, they might get some loss or harm. Okay, let's look at the second tip about suggestion and advice. And the person who suggests something may not have experienced the result. But on the other hand, advice is given based on speaker's personal experience, either direct experience or indirect experience. Now, let's look at the third tip about making suggestions and giving advice. A suggestion need not be taken very seriously, but advice should be considered seriously, because this is based on the speaker's personal experience. Okay, now, let's look at different ways of making suggestions. Here is how to make suggestions. You can say, let's have a picnic on the island. Shall we have a picnic on the island? What about having a picnic on the island? You can also say, how about having a picnic on the island? There are a few more. Why don't we have a picnic on the island? And the last one, I suggest we have a picnic on the island. You can also say, I suggest we should have a picnic on the island. Now let's look at things to remember while making suggestions. But when you make suggestions, you need to keep a few things in mind. Here are the ideas. Remember to use let's, but don't use let us. Use shall we, but do not use shall I. What about and how about? When we use them, you have to use ing form. After I suggest, use the verb in its first form. Now, let's look at giving advice. Let's look at different ways of giving advice. Okay, shall we look at different ways of giving advice? Okay. You can say, you should see a doctor. You ought to see a doctor. You had better see a doctor. It's better for you to see a doctor. If I were you, I would see a doctor. Now that we have looked at how to give advice, let's try to know what things should be kept in mind when giving advice. And now, let's look at a few things you should remember while giving advice. Use verb 1 after the word should. Do not use the preposition to after should. Do not use the preposition to after had better. If I were should always be followed by would and V1. Now let's try an exercise. I have a question for you here. Try to think of the answer. The question is, your friend is wasting time on video games. Advise him or her not to do so. Okay, you can say, you should not waste time on video games. Or you can say, you had better not waste time on video games. You have to notice one thing here. You had better not waste time. Do not use to here. To not or not to, don't say that. And again here, you should not waste time. Don't say you should not to waste time. So I have given only two ways of doing it. You can try the other ways as well. Let's move on to the second question. Your brother is still using an old model bike. Suggest him to buy a new bike. This is suggestion. Okay. You can say, why don't you buy a new bike? You can say, I suggest you buy a new bike. or I suggest you should buy a new bike. There are other possibilities as well. You can try them when you do the exam. Let's look at number 3. The question is this: you feel like going for a walk with your friend. How do you suggest this to your friend? Again, suggestion. Okay, I have used different answers here. Let's go for a walk. Let's go for a walk. You can also say, shall we go for a walk? You can try other possibilities as well. Okay, that's all for this video. I hope you enjoyed watching this video. If you like that video and then share it, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. See you in the next video. Thank you for watching.